This makes sense. Male behavior towards female gamers. A 2015 study found that lower skilled male players of Halo 3 were more hostile towards teammates with a female voice, but behaved more submissively to players with a male voice. Higher skilled male players, on the other hand, behaved more positively towards female players. The authors argued that the authors argued the male hostility towards female gamers in terms of evolutionary psychology, writing female initiated disruption of a male hierarchy incites hostile behavior from poor performing males who stand to lose the most status. That's interesting, man. That's a lot. That's a lot to unpack. There's a lot there. Sounds to me like a lot of the reason why the poor performing males are um, hostile towards women is because obviously of their poor performance, and they feel some kind of you know I don't know if I'd use the word shame, but they feel that their incompetence causes them to lash out at these at a female who's trying to infiltrate their group. That says a lot about what's currently going on, with men and women. Now, obviously, this isn't a one-to-one ratio exactly what's going on, because there's a lot more that's going on. But I would just say from my own experience, and it just seems like a lot of other guys' experiences, observing them, that you know, um, uh, it seems to me like, let me try to gather my thoughts on this. It seems to me that a lot of the vitriol towards women comes from a place of rejection. It seems to me, and from my own experience, when I'm doing really well with women, I tend to. Now, this isn't like I said, this isn't a one to one. There's nuance to this, and I'll explain that in a second. But when I'm doing really well with women, and I'm dating a good woman, which is rare. Obviously, we know that. But if I'm dating a good woman that makes me feel good, that is making me feel like a man, complimenting me, isn't an energy vampire draining my, she isn't just there to leech off of my high value. She's adding value to my life. It seems to me that I have a higher perspective of women in general. Now, that is where a lot of women um, have a responsibility, right? Because women should make a man feel good, and that's a lost art. That's a lost behavior, it seems. And if you watch my channel, obviously you know that I'm somebody who totally understands that, right? But what so many guys are going through in today's society is so much rejection, because our women are not uh, raised to love men. They're not raised to build up men. They don't know how to support a man, regardless of his value per se, right? If a woman loves you for you, she's not going to love you for what value you bring to the table. Now, a lot of guys in the red pill community strictly say that, like, oh, there's nothing else. There's no reason why a woman would love you if you don't bring value to the table, and value is relative, and value could be something intrinsic, this, that, and the third. Maybe, but particularly in our society today, a lot of women value things such as success, such as competence, such as money, and because those things, you know, translate into survival, right? And a woman's hypergamy is based on her survival instinct, and that is hardwired into their system. But things will change given, scientifically giving environment, giving, a different environment or a change in environment. And because we live in such potential opulence, right, in our society, where some people are just filthy rich and others are just poor, others are, mostly middle class. You could argue that the poor is really even middle class as well. Anyway, that's a whole nother story. But you know, it's just interesting. It's interesting to think about how female hypergamy is warped in today's day and age, and how that causes women to reject most men, and it causes what I would argue, and I've argued a lot on my channel, is that women don't know how to love men anymore. Women don't know how to love one man. Women don't know how to support or stick with a man despite his failures and his struggles. They, like Rich Cooper always famously says, is wait around at the finish line and pick the winners. Well, that has caused this vacuum of disgruntled men because we don't have women to love us, right? So it stands to reason that if you are one of these type of men and you're constantly getting rejected by women, you're going to have this viewpoint of women as these horrible beings who reject you so much, right? And what is that based on? Just like it says here, the men who are low performance, right? So we live in a society where it's hard to be a high performer because the standard and the bar is set so high that most men can't live up to it. So this is why we have this term in the red pill community, the top 10%, top 5%, top 20% of men, whatever, right? It's because that's the standard now. That these are the guys that most women are choosing, and they're choosing them in such a way that they're okay with being just a plate that these guys spin, right? Look at all the girls that Leonardo DiCaprio is banging. You'll see pictures of him with like 5, 6, 7, 8 women around him like it's his harem. And these are young, beautiful model type women. These women aren't going for Joe mechanic, Joe plumber, Joe delivery driver, or whatever. That's not as good of a job as a plumber or a mechanic probably, but they're not going for average and below average guys. You get my point, right? They're going for the highest value guy. So it stands to reason that there's going to be a vacuum of a lot of guys who just are getting nothing because these women don't know what values are anymore. They don't know what morals are anymore. They don't know what real love is anymore, real marriage. It's just a thing of the past almost at this point, right? Notwithstanding the divorce rates, I think people aren't getting married in general, period, because there's just so much access to something else. There's always something else to do, and money, and just the hypersexual culture that we live in, right? Where these women can just start an OnlyFans, grab a Pornhub account, Patreon, whatever, and get paid so much money to, be lewd, and then that will fund their lifestyle. So it's like, yeah, they don't need men financially as much, but that's still hardwired into their genetics. But also, you have to realize that, like, well, if they don't need us financially and they don't seek after us or want us anymore, like, what does that say about them in general from the beginning? Like, that's all we're good for is just money. That's all we're good for is just financial means to an end. It's like, why don't women love us in a deep way? How many are really like that out there? And if you find one, like, you'll see the difference. If you date one, you'll see the difference, and you'll be like, whoa, this girl actually is like really loving. This girl is actually like really caring, and despite how much money I make, she doesn't care about that. She's just different, and like you're like, whoa, this isn't just like something that only happens in the movies. Like, this is there are women out there like that, and they could be like that if they tried, but how many are there out there like that, right? Very, very, very few. And it's like, dang, you get one, you probably don't want to let that one go. But the point is that there's an overall phenomenon that's going on here, and you realize that maybe it's culture, maybe it's their nature that's being hacked, but this is this crazy phenomenon, and you look at the red pill and you're like, oh, well, that totally makes sense. Yeah, these guys are getting rejected because they're poor performers, and them being rejected for being poor performers causes this situation where they are vitriolic and hostile, it says here, right, towards females, and so that totally makes sense of what we're going through, with the red pill. Now, there's a difference between being hostile, and I said this when I was critiquing Undead Chronic. But there's a difference between being hostile and just telling the truth about the red pill. And we call it the red pill rage. And a lot of guys, such as somebody like Undead Chronic and Hammerhand, it sure seems like they haven't overcome their red pill rage phase. Yes, it's causes you to be angry. Yes, it causes you to be frustrated. It causes you to be sad and depressed when you really realize and learn females' true nature. I think I made a video maybe 2.5 years ago, called something like the hardest red pill to swallow, and it was that females are hypergamous, because you realize that it's something that's fundamentally shallow. And I talk about this in so many videos, that hypergamy is fundamentally not loyalty, right? When you love somebody, you love them despite their faults, whether they're rich or poor, et cetera, right? So at the end of the day, there's a lot of guys out there who haven't overcome that red pill rage. Now, you may be right in your truths, but it's how do you react to it? It's the exact same way that I was talking about Chronic. How do you react? Are you just spewing out toxic anger and hatred, or are you moving on with your life? Are you improving? There's nothing wrong with improving. For a while I was like, and from time to time I get caught up in this, but for a while I was like, why should I even improve? Why should I try to improve myself just so I could get rejected, or pardon me, just so I could get chosen? Whereas before I was being rejected because I wasn't good enough. Now that I'm good enough, it's like, would you really want somebody if you had to improve to get them? It's interesting, man. It's like, people should love you for who you are, for your heart. And that's a tough one for all of us, because even as men, we tend to be shallow. Oh, is she too overweight for you? Is she not good looking enough for you? Right? You should look on her. You should look on her heart, and she should look on your heart, and it should be about love. And that's a hard thing to do, because we're, particularly in this society, everything's about shallowness. Everything's about materialism, right? So, boy, like I said, there's a lot to unpack here. But it says higher skilled male players, on the other hand, behave more positively towards female players. That's interesting, because it shows you. And I remember too, I've had periods of my life where I was down and out. I just had all kinds of problems, and was suffering so much, and just felt horrible. And it was easy in those times to be angry at other people, and be envious, and be vitriolic and lash out, and it's a test when you're going through sufferings, and it's also a test when you're going through successes. And I remember there was periods of my time when I was younger that I was very successful, and during those times I tended to not be so angry. I tended to be more humble, and I tended to want to help people more. I tended to just be more adjusted in general. So it kind of shows me that a lot of the reason why so many guys are so full of rage and hostility towards the opposite sex is because they're failing, because the standards are so high, right? And so really what it takes somebody to love you for who you really are. And so much of my channel has been focused on hypergamy, and so much of my channel has been focused on how I always say people should love you for who you really are, and things like that. And it's so hard to find that. But if you do find that, it's like, genuine love is healing. Genuine love is so, important. And really a lot of that falls on the female's shoulders, because men have the kind of quote unquote burden of proof to prove themselves to women, and all women really do is sit back and choose. And you could argue that this is nature, this is evolution, whatever, and I would probably mostly agree with you. However, I would say that, if a female is raised right, she would look for substance in a man. And what is substance in a man? Substance in a man is inner substance. Now, it could be intelligence, whatever, but really it's about the heart, and I do believe that a lot of this has to do with God. I do believe a lot of this has to do with, because our hearts are very interesting things, man. Our hearts can be distorted. Our hearts can be warped. Our heart can be soiled. Maybe that's not the right word, soiled, but our heart can be damaged, probably is a better word, from a worldly, what's known as worldly traffic, because this world, which we Christians believe is run by Satan, which is ultimately evil. It's shallow, it's materialistic, it's not about values, it's not about inner substance, it's all about money, it's all about performance, it's all about competence, right? And it's all about flaunting riches and money and things like that for the most part. It doesn't mean there's not love in this world. It doesn't mean there's not, quality charactered people in this world, et cetera, right? There is. It's just it's not the main thing. It's not the main fuel that is, pushing the wheel of the, what causes the world to turn around. Mostly it's money, and that's how the world is evil, because money in and of itself is not necessarily evil, but the love of money can be evil. I mean, actually, I would argue that the money in and of itself is probably evil. It's not what God intended, in the beginning. But that's a whole nother story. We need money to survive, bottom line. But we should look to God to provide for us and care for us. And how many people do? How many women do? We have replaced God with a system, a monetary system. We replaced God with a government and a military to protect us, right? A government to, quote unquote, govern us and, take care of all the orders. But we all know it's, take care of all the issues and orderly things of society. But we all know the government is corrupt, right? Because man himself and mankind in general is corrupt. So therefore it makes sense that a government would be corrupt, right? And we all know it's corrupt, right? To whatever extent, wage is horrible. We're basically all wage slaves. Minimum wage should be like $28 an hour, $28 an hour, given inflation and things like that. And yet minimum wage is barely $15 an hour. Only in some states, I think. It's disgusting, right? Government, occupation, employment, the free market, capitalism, whatever you want to call it, even communism and all these other social, all these other types of systems, it's all corrupt, right? And we as men feel the need to compete, and we're not given any slack. We're expected to perform. We have the burden of performance, and women are. It is true. Most women wait around at the finish line and pick the winners. And anyway, I would just say that this is an interesting phenomenon, man. So the authors argue that the authors argue the male hostility towards female gamers in terms of evolutionary psychology, writing female-initiated disruption of a male hierarchy incites hostile behavior from poor performing males who stand to lose the most status. I suppose, but I left the Matrix at 19. I don't give a flip about flip or a flop about status. And it's interesting, checking out Undead Chronic and his channel and things like that, and you see that a lot. There's a lot of ego and pride that goes into like status and then a lot of it is followers. You have one high status male who has all these followers, right? And that's a weird thing too. That's a weird phenomenon, because it's like, why are you following a crowd? Like, who cares about a crowd? Step outside of that crowd and be your own man, do your own thing, make your own path, right? That's how you really grow in life. And that's why MGTOW used to be so cool and kind of a cool concept, because it's like, yeah, I'm not going to follow this crowd anymore. I'm not going to be a proponent of this matrix where I've got to perform, and if I don't perform, then I'm rejected, and if I'm rejected, I feel like a loser, and then I got to be hostile towards the women who reject me, or et cetera, et cetera. And I understand red pill rage, and I understand that it's disappointing, right? But step outside of that whole matrix, leave that whole thing behind, and leave women who are shallow and materialistic behind as well, right? Leave them behind. This vapid culture that's all about money and materialism is not good for your soul, and it's not good for men in general, who particularly who feel this need to perform, or else that they're not loved or accepted. And it's like, would you really want that type of love that's only there when you do something good? That's not, I would argue that that's not really love in the first place, particularly based on the definition of love in the Bible in First Corinthians. I think First Corinthians chapter 13, if I'm not mistaken, right? Love is patient, love is kind, da 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 da. That's a good example of love. I've always said that, but there's no love like God's love. God's love is the best love. And if you can find a woman who loves you with God's love, which is a kind love, which is a forgiving love, which is a patient love, which is a non-demanding love, and there's no love that's greater than God's love in such a non-demanding way as He is, because He says, you know, take my burden upon you and my yoke, take my yoke upon you, and you know, you'll find rest for your souls, right? And that's not what we have in this world. You know, in this world we have suffering, we have pain, we have slavery, the slavery to money, the slavery to performance, the slavery to materialism, etc. And you want to step outside of that as fast and as clear as you can. You know, find, you know, how I did it was I found God, I found the church, I found, you know, a lot of my purpose in you know, my foundational purpose in Christ the rock. You know, it says in the gospel, it says, build your house upon the rock, and the rock is Christ. So that's a sure foundation, you know. And not to say that we don't need money, not to say that we don't need to fulfill our duty to seek gainful employment and take care of ourselves, and if we do it in the right way and God blesses us and we prosper, you know, it's not going to be such a horrible thing that we see today, particularly in, you know, in our economy, when, you know, inflation's going up and it's hard to find a good job, and so many men are just disenfranchised, particularly young men. And it's sad, and suicide and anger and hatred and all these things are going on in our society don't have to be this way if we can readjust our values, right? One of the best ways to get self-esteem and get self-confidence is to step outside of the beaten path, step outside of the crowd, and stop following the crowd where the crowd is going. Again, how I did that was I started pursuing God, and I felt that was the purpose of my life, you know, to find out the real truth about existence, and I found it in, you know, God and the Bible. It may be different for you. I'm not, you know, marketing that, or this is not an advertisement for salvation per se, but salvation is pretty cool, right? It's pretty cool to have eternal life, and it's free, right? So that's a pretty cool thing. And, you know, anyway, like God says, those who seek me find me, you know. And so it's, for me, I just felt like it was my duty to find. It was I felt like I owed it to myself to find my purpose in life, because we're only here for 70 years, you know, 70, 80, 90 if we're lucky. But anyway, man, yeah, we also are animals, quote unquote, or mammals, quote unquote, whatever, and we have evolution, and it's hardwired into most women, but it doesn't mean that, you know, it has to be like that. It's just a lot of the reason why we act like animals is because we have stopped acting like humans. A lot of the reason we have been acting like animals is because we have deviated and floated away from our source, which is God. And we've put our trust in money, we've put our trust in material riches, we've put our trust in the worldly system, the worldly governments, etc., which is why there's so much anxiety out there, which is why there's so much fear, and why women are so warped in that they don't know how to love anymore. They don't know how to support a man anymore. They don't know how to work with a man to improve. And this is why so many men are disenfranchised, right? This is why so many men feel that they don't have real love and that no women really love them, etc. And it's disheartening, and it's heartbreaking, and it's sad, and all these things that cause red pill rage, and etc. But, you know, we live in this time where many people have fallen away from our foundation, and you could argue it's always been like that. You could argue that, you know, since the fall of man, right, since after Adam and Eve, it's been chaos, and indeed it truly has. But, you know, the basic the basic concept is that you should return to your source, return to God, and God wants us to return to Him, right? And He'll care for us and take away that anxiety, etc., etc. But how many people do it, and how many guys can really find a woman who's really godly in that way? That's a very difficult thing, you know. So, yeah, man, interesting stuff. Really is interesting stuff to check this out. Interesting, man. I just want to make this video. It's a very interesting thing. So I hope that we could, you know, come back to our source, right? And come back to loving ourselves. And even if you're single, even if you can't, foresee finding a quality woman like that ever in your life, etc., right? Still love yourself. It's okay. You know what I mean? Like, still love yourself. Still treat yourself. Still take care of yourself, right? That's what I always say. I always say, you know, find a hobby, find something that makes you happy, find something that causes you to want to continue to go on, because you can't just sit around in this slump, this mental slump. You can't just sit around in this, sit and stew in your failure or in your shame or in your disappointment in the opposite sex, etc., right? You gotta just figure out a way to love yourself and move on. And you can create confidence and fulfillment and purpose by finding something. You can create love even in your own life and in yourself by finding something that makes you feel like life is worth living for, finding some little slice of happiness in your soul, however that is, whether your thing is camping and fishing, or whether your thing is building cars, or whether your thing is helping out poor people, or whether your thing is learning a skill or a trade or building something, right? Whatever it is, man, that's what men have always done. And believe it or not, that's attractive to women, right? But it doesn't matter if it's attractive to women or not. What matters is that it gives you shouldn't do it because it's attractive to women. You should do it because it gives you a sense of purpose, and it gives you a sense of love and happiness and fulfillment, which, of course, I always say ultimately the best sense of love, happiness, and fulfillment is found in God and, in the Bible. But that's another story. But we can still really, have a better time here when we enjoy something, and when we appreciate something, and when we feel fulfilled by, seeking something out that is rewarding and worthwhile. And I would say that's one of the best ways to get out of depression. It's one of the best ways to build self-esteem. It's one of the best ways to build self-confidence. It's one of the best ways to really, not feel despondent and disappointed and depressed and feel like giving up because things are hard on us men, right? If you channel your energy into something resourceful, that's not just about money or building up your ego or things like that, then you'll kind of find and learn what it really means to be a man, and what it, you'll find a piece of self-worth, and you'll find a piece of purpose, I believe, when we do that. And there's like I said, there's a myriad of ways to do it. Go on Amazon and buy some painting materials. Go on Amazon and buy a car model or something. Find something that you know what I mean, like it's something small as that. Or you could go around offering to shovel snow for free, and people will love you, and you'll have these nice interactions, and you'll meet people, and it'll be great, and you'll have dynamic interactions which give you energy, right? Or create something that helps people, or just volunteer your services, or whatever it is, man. Find something, find your thing. But anyway, I'm gonna leave it there, guys. Appreciate you listening. Hope y'all are doing well. It's been Jay Lee with Northwest Podcast. Peace.